guests. We have our own rogue, Isabella Maldonado, and we're going to have a slightly different format tonight, which I think is going to be really interesting. So what's going to happen is I'm going to introduce each guest in alphabetical order. That means we'll have Steve Berry, then Richard North Patterson, then Kate White, and then rogue Isabella Maldonado. As a rogue, we're going to flip-flop the alphabet a little bit. And I'm going to introduce each guest. I'm going to read you a little bit about them and their new books. I'm going to ask each guest to talk about their new books, because a lot of these are departure books. And even when they're sort of in the framework of what, adoring fans have come to expect from the author, I found that there was a little bit of something new in each book. So I'm going to let each author to talk about that. Then I'm going to ask the authors sort of questions. I think Chris touched on this, where they'll interact and you'll get to hear from them about the creation of the book process and the writing process and publishing as we are experiencing it today. And we'll go down the kind of row of authors and they'll each give you an answer, but sort of talk amongst themselves as well. And we're going to wrap up the evening with readings from the authors who wish to read. Some of our authors may not, and in that case, we'll get to hear from them a little bit more and have some extra questions. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the great Steve Berry. He's the New York Times and #1 internationally best-selling author of 21 novels. They've been translated into 41 languages with over 25 million copies in print in 52 countries. Consistently, they appear on the very highest of the bestseller list, New York Times, USA Today, indie bestseller list, which I love. Bookstores are near and dear. And this is my fun fact about Steve, which, everybody who hears it, jaw will drop. Every 30 seconds, somewhere in the world, somebody sells one of his books. This new book that Steve is here to talk about is called The Ninth Man. And it's, a lot of us know Steve as the Cotton Malone series guy and the deep dive into history guy. And here we're going to talk to him about a new series with Luke Daniels. And I'll just read you one or two lines because I really think Steve is going to be able to explain it best. But Luke Daniels is in London between assignments when he receives a frantic call from an old friend. She made a mistake and now her life may be in danger. She needs Luke's help immediately. Racing to Belgium, Luke quickly finds that she was right. A shadow team of highly trained operatives are there on the hunt. Intervening, he finds himself embroiled in a war between two determined sides, one seeking the truth and the other trying to escape the past. Steve, please tell us, and great to see you. Thank you for being on. And please tell us about The Ninth Man.
Well, it's as you said, a departure for me. This is the book. It'll be out next Tuesday. Luke Daniels is a secondary character in the Cotton Malone world. He was created to be a younger version of Cotton, where he can make mistakes, screw up, be a little impetuous, and add a little bit of a little different element to the Cotton Malone stories. But I long thought that he could sustain his own book if he needed to, and I pitched the idea to Grand Central and they said, yes, let's do it. So, but there's no way in the world I can write 2 books a year. There's too much research and too much that goes into each one of the books. So I called up Grant Blackwood, who I've known for about 20 years, and asked him if he would help me out. And he said that he would. So together we wrote the book. I had the idea for the novel. I had the basic concept. I had everything. It deals with something from the Kennedy assassination, something that I think will surprise readers, something I don't think they know a lot about. It's true, it's real, but it's also quite interesting. And Grant took that idea and wrote a first draft of the novel. Then I took the novel and rewrote it. And then we went back and forth because he doesn't know my voice yet. And so I had to put my voice into everything. And it was a good mix because Grant's really good with action adventure. I'm pretty good with history. So together we kind of meld together and we got a book that I think the readers are going to really enjoy. It's a very fast-paced story. It's a tight novel. It's about 99,000 words, which is a little short for me. And so it runs really quick. There'll be 2 more, one next summer and one the summer after. So I hope Luke gets to stay around a while.
I want everybody out there in the audience to notice that Steve Berry just said he's pretty good with history. Pretty good.
Well, I give it my best shot. Let's put it that way.
We're going to get into it, actually, Steve. You anticipated some of the things that I know our listeners are interested in, which is the collaboration process, maybe some more of the nuts and bolts, and also going into what is just an iconic period of history. And then, as you said, presenting it from a totally different angle. So I'm hoping we get to hear a little bit more on that. Tuck that away as things
Okay.
that I know we're all interested in. But let's also keep moving down the line, and we'll introduce Richard North Patterson, who is the new book that we have is Trial. And I know in some ways it's not a departure, but for me, reading your work, I felt like I was in all new territory. But let me introduce Rick, and then he can speak to that. So Richard North Patterson is the New York Times bestselling author of 22 previous novels. He's also the author of Fever Swamp, which is a nonfiction narrative of the 2016 presidential campaign. And those of you who follow Rick outside of his fiction might know that he writes pieces about our world today and the politics in it that, well, they might make you want to jump off a cliff, but they will keep you more informed without having to go off that cliff yourself than I think any other writer out there. I'm a big, big fan. He's written extensively on American politics, a regular columnist for HuffPo, the Boston Globe, the Bulwark, and his articles have been featured in such publications as the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, and USA Today. Rick is a former trial lawyer, and he was also the SEC liaison to the Watergate special prosecutor. So that's quite a bio. Trial is said to confirm Richard North Patterson's place as our most important author of popular fiction. And I'm just going to read you the description, and then I'm going to ask Rick to tell us about this very incendiary novel. A Black 18-year-old voting rights worker is stopped by a white sheriff's deputy on a dark country road in rural Georgia. His single mother, America's leading voting rights advocate, restlessly awaits his return before police inform her that her son has been arrested for murder in Washington, D.C. Arrested for murder. In Washington, D.C., the rising young white congressman, Brevard of Massachusetts, is watching the morning news with his girlfriend, only to find his life transformed in a single moment by the appearance of Malcolm's photograph. Rick, please tell us about Trial.
Well, thank you, first of all, Jenny, for that gracious introduction. The book was not always received such good grace, as you may know from reading my essay on the experience in the Wall Street Journal. It got me into a lot of trouble. So here's how it started. In writing over 300 columns, as you noted, I realized that more of them than I would have liked dealt with directly or indirectly our problems of race. I also believe that fiction is a good way to get people to look at our problems in a different and fresh way, assuming you can rip them with an exciting story. As my late friend Pat Conroy once said, fiction is a place I go to tell the truth. And I believe in that. So I designed the plot that you suggest, and I meant to tell an exciting story about what it's like to be trapped in a racially incendiary trial for capital murder, but also to address such issues as voter suppression, unequal law enforcement, the rise of white nationalism, and the exploitation of racial anxiety by politicians and the media. Two of my three major characters are Black. The defendant, Malcolm Hill, his mother, Allie Hill. The third major character is Chase Brevard, a white congressman. But a fourth principal character is the Black lawyer defends Malcolm at trial. So I'm a white guy, and I'm writing from the perspective of two Black people as well as a white person. That didn't used to be the problem it is now, but you all know the story of American Dirt. And the whole business of you can only write about what you're presumed to know. I'll end with this irony. I interviewed over 50 people for this book, many of them Black residents of Georgia, ministers, lawyers, judges, police officers, so civil rights and voting rights activists, ordinary folks, whoever I could talk to. Their voices permeate the book. And the Manhattan publishers who objected to the contents, not because of the contents themselves, but because of my race, I dare say have never had any of the direct experience with racial issues that my Georgia interviewees shared with me. And yet they presume to be the literary benefactors of Black America. So I've had a very interesting experience with this book. I hasten to add that I have three strong
And I mean, obviously a whole panel could be devoted just to that topic. And I don't think, I don't even know that. To me, Rick, reading your political writings, you're a chronicler of this country. And I took the book within that guise. Obviously, it's not my place to weigh in on the issues you're raising, any more than, another person of my race. But I saw it within the guise of you chronicling our nation and doing so with depth and sensitivity. So as also a white person, that is, and I don't think that, I think that this is just, as you said, incendiary and difficult to feel our way through. And I appreciate you speaking so honestly and candidly about it.
Well, I'll simply say this. Anytime you write outside your own identity, and it can be within sociology rather than race, you have to do your homework. But the better you do it, the more you enrich our literature. So I worked hard.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you did. I think you do on all your books. I think the issue of fiction, and we will get, that's a question that I actually am going to put to all four authors. So if you want to tuck it away, it's about the role of fiction in these times and whether we go to it to escape and whether we go to it to dig deeper and all those things. So I'm going to talk to every author about that tonight, I hope. But before that, I would like to move on to Kate White. I go to Kate White's books for suspense. I call it high stakes suspense on the intimate stage. When I read a Kate White novel, I know that I am going to get to know people who I feel like they could be friends. I feel like they could be people I'd sit down at the dinner table with, but they all live the most glamorous, exciting, suspenseful, secret-ridden lives. So let me introduce you to Kate White. Some of you may know her as the former editor-in-chief of Cosmo magazine. She's the New York Times bestselling author of standalone psychological thrillers, including The Second Husband, The Fiancé, and The Secrets You Keep, as well as 8 of the Bailey Wiggins mystery series. White is also the author of several popular career books for women and editor of the Anthony and Agatha Award-nominated The Mystery Writers of America cookbook. And Between Two Strangers, which is her latest, can be described this way. An out-of-nowhere inheritance sends a woman in search of the truth about who the benefactor is and the unfinished business he left behind. Artist Skylar Moore has retreated from the world after tragedy devastated her family, but finally creating again, she is sort of about to re-enter the New York City art world in her first real gallery show. But as she listens skeptically, a lawyer informs her that she is the recipient of a mysterious bequest. The only problem? The person who left it to her is dead. Kate, please tell us about Between Two Strangers.
Well, it is a little bit different for me because I've now done 10 standalones, and a number of them have had to do with marriage, and that's at the core. But in this case, Skylar is almost 38 and single, and her life hasn't gone the way she wanted to. There's a dual timeline that has to do with 12 years ago and her sister's disappearance. They're both students in Boston, Skylar as in the grad school at Boston University in art. And she finds out that she's got this inheritance, and she meets with a lawyer and discovers she has no idea. She doesn't recognize the guy's name. And, she's assuming it's a mistake, or maybe it's someone who is interested in art and wants to, do kind of things for young, struggling artists. But eventually, when she's with the lawyer, she realizes that it's a guy she had a one-night stand with 12 years ago. But the real kicker is that he's left her $3.5 million. So I guess when I was younger, if you had a one-night stand, you were lucky if you were called Angel of the Morning. But in this case, remember that song? Richard, you might remember it because
I do very well. Nobody ever promised to leave me $3 million.
Yeah. Well, you never sang that to anybody, though, right? So anyway, that's the story. And Skylar basically has to try to figure out, because the wife is coming after the trust, and she has to figure out why he left it to her, because having all the information will be of value to her. And I got the idea actually because when my mom died a few years ago, one of my brothers was the executor, and a check, part of her decent but small estate, went to someone we didn't know. And we're like, does our mother, did she have a secret? Is there some sibling that we're not aware of? And it turned out to be a relative. And we were just kind of shocked. And she had it was an old married name of her. She'd been married a number of times. And we're like, well, why did you accept the check? My mom had some memory issues in her late 80s. And but it turns out it was a bank error. So we get the money and they never claw it back from her. But it got me thinking about inheritance and, what if you did get money from somebody that you weren't expecting to get it from?
Interesting. So it's been gelling since that happened. I'm sorry about the loss of your mom, but it's been gelling kind of since then.
Yeah, I wrote other books since then, but it was always in my mind.
Very interesting. All right, we might get into that too, about it's sort of the drawer novels or the kernels that we go back to. That's very interesting. But please let me welcome and introduce Rogue Isabella Maldonado. Isabella is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and she wore a gun and a badge in real life before turning to crime writing. She's a graduate of the FBI National Academy in Quantico and the first Latina to attain the rank of captain in the Fairfax County Police Department just outside DC. She retired as the commander of special investigations and forensics, and during more than 2 decades on the force, her assignments included hostage negotiator, department spokesperson, precinct commander, and she uses her law enforcement background to bring a realistic edge to, as I said, her Wall Street Journal best-selling fiction, which includes the best-selling series starring, sorry, Isabella, I'm stumbling over your bio, the best-selling series featuring FBI Special Agent Nina Gutera, which is soon to be a Netflix, you're going to hear why I'm stumbling, soon to be a Netflix feature film starring Jennifer Lopez. I have to say that again because I'm so excited to hear this. In a Killer's Game, Isabella is featuring an FBI agent with a background in cryptography, a brilliant game maker bent on revenge, and a deadly battle of wits and wills. FBI agent and former military code breaker Danny Vega witnesses a murder on a Manhattan sidewalk. The victim is chief of staff for a powerful New York senator, and the assassin turned informant is Gustavo Toro. His code, hit the target, don't ask questions. But when Danny suspects a complex conspiracy, the only way to take down the mastermind is from the inside, forcing her to partner with none other than Toro. And then there's this whole locked room thing, and it's really cool. I'm going to let Isabella take it away and tell us.
About the book. So this was a departure for me. I've never written anything at all like this. I love riddles, codes, puzzles, and things like that. And so I thought to myself, okay, I also, with my law enforcement background, I like to lean into that. So I thought, well, how do we bring all that together? And also the other thing that really got me inspired about this book was the explosion in popularity of escape rooms all over the world. In major cities around the world, people are lining up around the corner to go into escape rooms, and they try to, beat the bomb or, whatever. And I thought, what if this really happened? I mean, what if there was something like that where you really would have a deadly consequence if you couldn't solve the puzzle in time? But it also is like heavily into police procedural and FBI as well. So I created this awesome character. And one of the things I also wanted to do here was to have like a real, heroic character that is female. And so I thought to myself, why does Jack Reacher and Jason Bourne and, Mitch Rapid, why do they get all the fun? Why don't we have a woman who, could really do this? And so I thought about, what kind of woman would do that? And then I did some research and I found out that they're the first female Army Rangers who successfully went all the way through first and second and were fully scrolled and joined the 75th Ranger Regiment out of Fort Benning occurred in 2017. And then the first ones who were deployed in combat were in 2019. So there are very few. There's just a handful of these women. They are amazing. They do not, and the reason there's only a handful is because they do not change the standards at all. And they have videos of these women, and they will pick up a 180-pound man and do a fireman's carry while they're running through, you know, like a simulated minefield. I mean, they have to be able to do everything the men can do. There are so few women who have the sheer physical strength. And it also takes a lot of mental strength to get through that kind of training. It's grueling. It's just, you know, it's just grueling. And so I was so admiring these few women. I thought, I want to celebrate this. And so I gave my main character this background, that she had been one of the few Army Rangers. And then she, you know, transitioned out of her Army career. And she was also a code breaker. When they went on their ops overseas, she would do any kind of you know, that needed to be done. And so then she got out of that and she went to the FBI and joined their Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York City. And that is their largest joint terrorism task force in the United States. And it just, I mean, wow, it took off from there. And I just fell in love with this woman and her story. And it turns out that this just came out. So here's the book. It just came out on June 1st. And it's already, I mean, people are going crazy for Daniela Vega. I mean, they're just like, wow. And I think it's fun that when they read and they realize, no, there are women like this. It's great.
But as you say, only a few. And I think that's kind of, you know, what's special to see something that is so rare and yet actually does happen. So it has that touch of reality, which brings me, I would like to ask, so I said we're going to have some questions that all four authors kind of weigh in on. And we're going to go down the line just exactly as I introduced you. We'll start with Steve, we'll move on to Rick, then to Keith, then back to Isabella. But I would love to have all four of you have very interesting professional backgrounds. And Keith, while I know that this heroine is not in journalism, I still have the feeling that kind of you were art world adjacent. You were New York City glam life, you know, and I just would love all four authors to kind of talk about integrating their real life experiences and stuff from the nonfiction world at large when they are writing one of their novels. If you could all sort of speak to that, because all of your novels, as much as they give us fictional departures, they also really immerse us in something very real. And so I'd love to hear each author kind of speak to that.
I first?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you may not like my answer to this. I don't adhere to the philosophy that you write what you know. I actually think that's pretty bad advice, to be honest with you. I adhere to the philosophy that you should write what you love. If what you know and what you love are the same thing, great. But if they're not, pick the one you love. I was a lawyer. I was a trial lawyer. I tried people for murder. Every crime you could think of, I did it. I was in court, you know, an enormous amount of time. I tried jury trials. I did all that. But I just didn't want to write about it. I don't want to write about it. I didn't want to write about it at all. I saw people at their worst. I saw things at their worst. And I liked action, history, secrets, conspiracies. So I wrote things that got me away from that took me out of that took me as far away from that as I could get. Now, was any of that helpful in the writing? Not really, to be honest with you. I mean, there was a little bit here and there when you talk about evidence, or you talk about if there's a little legal question that it comes up in a novel, but by and large, no. I like to take things from the past, something real, something people don't know much about, and then I like to weave a modern day tale around that thing from the past, and that's what I love to do. And so to be a lawyer and do that were very, very different. In fact, it took me about 6 years to quit writing like a lawyer. Because, you know, the object of legal writing is to say something over and over and over and over until you can convince someone that you're correct, that you're designed to persuade people. That's what legal writing is all about. So you tend to repeat yourself in order to make that happen. Where in fiction, you say it once. And the object of fiction is to entertain. So there's a great distinction there. So I had to get all that out of my system. So for me, my former profession really offered little to nothing to me except motivation to escape.
Fascinating. I'm really fascinated to hear what Rick, who I suspect is going to have a different answer, but maybe he'll surprise me too. I don't know.
No, I won't surprise you. I deeply respect Steve's career. We just went at how we use law in a different way. I think the courtroom is a crucible for some of our great social controversies. You look at the George Floyd trial, and you see immediately how much that has to say about the world that we live in. I also know that as a trial lawyer, and I think Steve would agree with this, you have to take messy facts and arrange them into a narrative that makes sense to the jury, and you have to translate character to the jury, all those things. But I also have spent a good chunk of my career as a novelist writing about politics. I've written about politics as a columnist, nonfiction, for 6 years. I've had friendships or friendly relationships with the 4 presidents immediately before Donald Trump, about whom I say only the very nicest things. So I am very grounded in the worlds I wrote about in trial, in the sense it's about the political career of a congressman who discovers, much to his surprise, that he's the father of an 18-year-old black man on trial for capital murder, something which he never knew, although he loved the mother very much. But it's also about our justice system and how it works with race. So all of that really came from my professional background. That said, you don't write about Black people without talking to Black people. And I did a lot. And we'll get to it later, but given that one of my principal characters is a Black female, and we can talk a little bit more about how I got into her head, or felt I did, to write a persuasive character, because I'm going to read the first chapter from her point of view. So we'll get to that eventually.
Interesting. All right, Kate, and a very different kind of answer, I think, but I don't know it, and I'm eager to hear what you have to say.
Well, sometimes people do ask me, did it help that you had this career in magazines? And to some degree, there were advantages. Like, I certainly knew and edited many successful authors, everyone from Maureen Dowd to, just lots of different terrific writers, some of them who were authors. And so I understood a little bit about the process through that. And I knew, oh, you have to get an agent. So I had a little advantage. And I do think that when you work in magazines, you're never allowed writer's block. You just, you have to do it. And, when I was editing Cosmo, which I did for 14 years, we became number 1 on newsstands and stayed at number 1. And that was something you just had to, do. You had to write the cover lines. Though I always told my kids, Mommy doesn't write those cover lines. They're written by somebody else in another location. So I think that helped me certainly with writing fiction, just to kind of, if you feel stuck, just to keep going. And that was certainly a value, but the kind of writing that you do in magazines is all tell, and fiction needs to be more show. So it took me longer to burn that off when I first started. And just in terms of characters, the character of my series, she is a true crime writer, and I did that in part because I do love to research, but it's an advantage if you know some stuff going into it. And all my characters and my standalones have had jobs that are somewhat related to things I know or I've done. The last book, the person was like a generational research, and Trend Spotter, and I use those people at Cosmo, and Joel Benenson, who did a lot of the brilliant work for Obama in terms of polling. He helped me with my book because he used to do projects for me. This is the first book where the person is an artist that I didn't have really that much experience, but I do, collect art for many years and love it. So for me, a big part of it is always doing the research to make up for whatever you lack in firsthand experience.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how those things in our life kind of bubble up into the fiction. So, Isabella, wore a gun and a badge, and you're writing about a bad, ASS, and tell us about your life and then how it gets onto the page or doesn't get onto the page.
Exactly. Okay, so yeah, what I had to learn how to do, it's kind of funny. Hearing Steve said something really funny and interesting about being a lawyer. He's talking about, that your job is to say it over and over and over again. Well, cop writing is the exact opposite of that. When you do a police report, it is just the facts, ma'am. You are Joe Friday. And your whole thing is you just need to spit it out, the most important thing first, and then, just like in order. There's no art to it. It's not pretty. It's just, very, very blunt. And it's funny because I write very short, to the point, punchy and all that. And I had to learn to, flesh it out a lot. And also, creative writing is the opposite of police writing, or at least it should be. Let's hope the police aren't engaging in creative writing. So that's the other thing too, is to withhold information and to massage it and whatever. It's a completely different thing. And so when I retired from police work, I literally spent 5 years studying the art and craft of writing before I attempted my first novel, because I had to do that. It was so radically different from anything I did. But the good news is, once I learned how to do that, then I could use a lot of my background, to really make my stories more realistic. But I can't make them really real, because that's just, nobody wants to watch what really goes on in police work. It's not anything interesting. But then on the other part about, also write what you love, not just what you know. Like in this story that I wrote, I have never been in the military, but my character was both military and law enforcement. I did a metric ton of research into the Army Rangers. I have a stack of books. Steve's famous for his stacks of books that he has, that, with all that. I have a huge stack of books too. And some of it was even like the Army issued manual for the Rangers. I actually got a hold of that, and then a bunch of other things too. And so I had to do a ton of research, and it really felt good that several people who were in the military have written to say they loved it. So that's like, yes, you did the work, it was worth it. So it's a combination of, also writing what you love and what you find fascinating. I agree with that.
Interesting. Thank you, Isabella. Yeah, I can see how getting that approval from the horse's mouth must feel very affirming, very validating. So, Steve, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you're not just pretty good at history. I would like to know, in The Ninth Man, you're in, as you said, this iconic part of history that everyone in the country has some connection to, probably. And yet you're telling us, as you said, and I don't want any spoilers, about a little known aspect. And I'd like to know what that was like for you, and how you brought that real world to the fictional world, and tell us more. And yes, we should certainly acknowledge that Steve is writing with a wonderful collaborator. I hope we'll get to hear a little more about that. That's author Grant Blackwood. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about,
Before I answer that, I have to be a fanboy a little bit. This is one of my favorite books of all time.
Oh my God, Steve, bless you. Yeah,
And
you read that after running away from law? That really is kind.
And look at this, it's in plastic.
It's
See?
preserved for all time. It survived even a nuclear attack. That's great.
That's almost that's a 20-year-old novel.
Oh, believe me, I know it well. You may have had this experience when you look at 44 years of book jacket pictures as I have. It's not a pretty sight. You wonder how he ended up looking like a relief map of Afghanistan. It's pretty depressing.
But this is one of my favorite legal thrillers of all time. It's in my top 10 books. I mean, this is a really, really wonderful novel. And
Well,
also, I like Degrees of Guilt, Eyes of a Child. I like those too. But this one was just a little step up.
Well, I wrote from the point of view of a woman, and unfortunately, it was early enough in my career where I could get away with it. You really wonder what you can get away with now.
I thought you did a great job. You thought you
Thank
captured it. I just want to be a little fanboy. I have it. I've kept it all these years.
Well, thank you very much. Well, especially given your success and professionalism, that means a lot, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I've enjoyed reading you over the years. Looking forward to reading Trial, very much so.
Well, thank you.
Now, back to the question you had, Jenny. Remind me again.
It's an iconic part of history.
Oh yeah, you
had
want
a
to talk about
connection
the
to it.
theory. Oh yeah, that's right. All right. What we did, I came across something that I'd never read about before in the Kennedy assassination. It was something unique, something very different. It was published in a book in 1992, a book called Mortal Error. And the book was not very well received. Nobody really paid much attention to it, but it's been around a long time. And the theory is very fascinating in there. And I can't say what it is because it'll give away plot of the novel, but I will say that I didn't make it up. I took it from that book. And the book makes a lot of sense when you begin to look at it from the standpoint of things that a lot of people don't know about. An example, a lot of people probably don't know that on the night before Kennedy was killed, a handful of the Secret Service agents who were assigned to his detail for the next day went out drinking all night. They were basically hungover when they got to work the next day. They had not slept very much. And there were 8 in the detail, and a majority of those had gone out and done that. The Warren Commission has 2 sentences in their report that they found that, yes, that happened, but no, it had no effect on anything. They did just fine. Well, here's the problem. Of the 8 Secret Service agents that were there, they only interviewed 2. They didn't even interview the other 6. So there's a lot of hugely unanswered questions that the Warren Commission was designed for one thing and one thing only, to calm the nation down. They wanted to issue a report, Oswald killed Kennedy, no conspiracy, everything's good, everybody's happy. And that was it. As Alan Dulles, who served on the commission, said at the time, no one's going to read it anyway. Well, he was wrong. He was dead wrong. People did read it, and they're still reading it to this day. But the book Mortal Error took it on in a different way, in a different tack. And it's it's well put together book. It answers a lot of questions that have not been answered. And I wanted to use it with Cotton for a long time, but it didn't work. So it worked with Luke. It worked with Luke really well. So I think the readers are going to get something with the Kennedy assassination fresh, something they don't know a lot about, something they're going to, I hope, go like, oh, wow, whoa, that didn't see that. That's not as crazy as it sounds. That may actually have some merit to it. And so that's what I like to explore, those things out there, and it made for a good thriller. And I hope the readers are going to like it.
Well, I know I'm going to, because I intend to pick it up right away.
Thank you, sir.
And I hope that all of our listeners are going to pick up copies of each of these books. We're going to whet the readers' appetites with some readings from those who want to read. And I'm going to go down in just a second. And then hopefully, if we have time, we'll circle back and some of our authors will have questions. We'll be able to ask some more questions. But Steve, I mean, I found it interesting. I think what you're talking about is something nobody knows, and yet when they read it, they sort of feel like, oh, that does make sense, though. And that, I mean, that encapsulates the ninth man. I think I can imagine it appealing to a great many people because we want to know more, and maybe we don't even know what we don't know about this.
I want to get you thinking about some things, and it got you thinking about some things. And when they're done, if they want to read Mortal Error, please do read it and get some more out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as I say, I'm very hopeful that all of our listeners out there are going to hugely enjoy The Ninth Man and Trial in Between Two Strangers and a Killer's Game. And we will start with some brief readings. I think what we will do is go for Kate, if anybody is not expecting to read or did not want to, really just raise a hand. I have so many questions and I can already see that. We're bringing this in for a landing at 8 p.m. We really try to do that. It's going to be hard. So if you're an author and did not want to read, that is perfectly fine. We will start with Kate, and we'll go to Isabella. We'll wrap up with Rick. And then I'm hoping we have time for another question for anybody who has not read. And let's right now start with Kate reading an excerpt from Two Strangers.
I was going to pass because I'm a terrible reader. I always feel like when I read, people think maybe she has the book ghost written because she seems unfamiliar with the text. But I'll use my time to just ask Steve if did he? You've been to the book depository, right? I'm sure. And I hadn't been until I went to BoucherCon in Dallas. And that really reawakened for me so much about the Kennedy assassination. I'm looking forward to your book. I really am.
Yeah, and I went to, and what struck me, Dealey Plaza is small.
Yeah.
Very small.
And the grassy knoll is like 4 inches high.
Right. Yeah. The whole thing was interesting when you get there. It's a very, very tight theater where this happened. You'd see the big movies and TV. It looks so big, but the whole thing is not 50, 60 yards wide. It's very small in there. Yeah.
Right. So that was good for me to use my time for that because I'm just now like even more interested in the Kennedy assassination.
Now I'm going to have some extra questions for you, Kate. But yeah, let's and I hope that everybody will, whether you're here reading or not, please pick up all of these books because you'll have a riveting weekend of reading. But okay, Rogue Isabella, would you like to read a small short excerpt from A Killer's Game?
Well, no, it's kind of tricky. I have the same, trouble where I'm trying to figure out, like where would be the best thing to do. So
it is up to you. Don't feel.
Yeah, I'm thinking that it might be better to just maybe have another thing, I guess, maybe I'll say about this. And also about kind of in general how I write. One of the things I like to do, and I do use, this is part of where I use my background, is I also studied a lot of brain science. And I actually just wrote an essay in Criminal Element, and it's like cited scholarly kind of stuff, but it's all about brain science. And because what I'm fascinated by is people who will, what motivates people, why people decide they're going to kill, or do they decide, or is it, but serial killers in particular. When I was at the FBI National Academy in Quantico, and one of the courses that I was taking there was some training from the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit on serial killers. They showed us everything because we're law enforcement, and we got to see all about what makes the mind of these people work, what makes up someone who is an antisocial personality, how they are different from ordinary, or I should say neurotypical people, and the PET scans and everything that show how their brains actually are wired differently. And, I find that fascinating. And when I put information from some of that research, into my books, I find that people do find that interesting too, because I think a lot of people feel that they want to understand why some humans act this way. And in law enforcement, it was interesting. I mean, I think it was Richard was talking about seeing the best and the worst of people, and it's the same. I think Steve did too. It's the same thing in law enforcement. You see the most beautiful and heroic and amazing acts. When you're right there, you get a front seat to all of it, but then you also see the most inhumane, brutal, horrible things of man's inhumanity against man. And I put all of that emotion, all of that thought into there. So it's kind of like, you get the action, but all of this feeling and everything that generates it. And, so I feel like that's one of the reasons that people connect to the characters, because it doesn't matter how exciting the story is. If the characters don't jump off the page and you don't connect with them, then you really don't care.
Boy, do I ever agree with that. That's absolutely right. I think that's great.
I mean, and it's interesting because you're talking, I guess, about sociopathy and depravity and how do you make that accessible somehow and make the reader care how it comes out. And that's such a big part of fiction. So I can see how the law enforcement is kind of the lens for all of that, Isabella. Okay, as I say, I hope all of our listeners are going to pick up copies of these books. They are on our website. They will be for at least another few weeks. You can see the book covers, you can see the names. I know we're going to get at least one excerpt read today, and then I would love to go down the line and hopefully have time for a wrap-up question. But Rick, you alluded to reading, so if you would like to.
I have. This is also interesting. I've decided to cut what I'm going to read about in half, so more people have time to talk. But I'll say two things briefly. It's the second chapter in the book. Allie Hill is waiting. A single mother is waiting for her son Malcolm to come home. He's late. The reader knows he's in deep trouble. He's been stopped by the police, but she doesn't know that. The second thing I'll say is that if Allie doesn't work, this book doesn't work. So with that said, I'll read a very redacted version of chapter 2. Pacing the living room of the weathered farmhouse she shared with her son, Allie Hill stopped to check her phone for texts. Nothing. Pacing from room to room, Allie recommenced her restless pursuit of nothing save to kill time. She was slight and intense, gifted with a kinetic energy to fuel the swiftness of thought, speech, and movement so marked that, so her mother said, she seemed to burn calories just by being herself. Waiting for Malcolm, she gazed at the photographs which they had hung on the walls, her parents and grandparents at her kitchen table, a Hill family gathering on the green farm outside, Malcolm watching his grandfather slip his ballot into a drop box, the faces of ordinary Black people from hard times past. It's good to remember, she had told her son. She stopped, pensive. Through the window screen, she could hear the sounds of a spring night in southwest Georgia. Crickets, wind rustling the leaves of trees, but not the one she awaited, the hum of a motor coming up the drive. Gazing in the darkness, she inhaled the scent of the creep myrtle pills of trees she fitfully tended, felt the moist, lingering heat of a spring day that augured another sweltering summer that would breed mosquitoes as big as dive bombers, sensed the coming of a thunderstorm, perhaps bearing the jagged, shimmering bolts of lightning that, when Allie was small, had split the night sky and announced the awesome nearness of God. Through sheer will, she stopped herself from calling him Malcolm. He was touchy and proud, too aware that the major force in his life was a woman others viewed with something akin to awe. He was on the cusp of adulthood, searching for an identity all his own. He felt her anxieties and desires for him as a person, but she would have suffered them in better times than these. He was an 18-year-old Black man in Georgia who was sometimes too quick to anger, and one moment of misjudgment could change his life in ways she could not imagine. I should add that he's doing voting rights work, which makes him a target because she is. Now her work meant living with all the hatred welling up from the fever swamp of fanatics who believed she was bent on replacing white Christians with brown and Black people who would destroy their primal America. The fact that Allie too was a Christian meant nothing. After the 2020 election, armed white militia advanced in front of her offices in Freedom. Right-wing extremists had posted her picture, and then more ominously, photographs of her home on the internet. Wake up in the morning, she discovered another voice message from an unknown caller. His ungrammatical threats of sexual violence and asphyxiation would have been almost comical if not for the venom seeping through the honey-dipped inflection. She had given up wondering how these people got her cell number, though she had always loathed firearms, except for the rifle her father used for hunting. Lately, she had considered buying a handgun. But the fear she felt most profoundly was not for herself. Yesterday, for the first time, a particularly virulent website had posted Malcolm's high school yearbook picture with the caption, Allie Hill's illegitimate son. Once again, she checked her cell phone. Still nothing. Stepping outside, she stood in ankle-deep grass, gazing up at the sliver of moon suspended in the distance above Cape County. Then she snatched the phone from her pocket and called Malcolm. So, to do the research for her, I went to Georgia. I talked to all sorts of people in the county, which was the kind of place she would have lived. I interviewed voting rights leaders, including successor to Stacey Abrams, because she's portrayed at Harvard in 2003 in flashbacks. I went to Henry Louis Gates, and Skip fixed me up with interviews with 3 Black women who'd gone there about time. I did, interviewed the mothers of Black sons to talk about their fears. I did everything I could to get Allie right, and I'm proud of the work.
I thank you for reading it. I can only speak as a woman, and I can say that feeling that, that clench of fear and a child out there somewhere is certainly there on the page, right? So.
Thank you.
Okay, Kate, I have a question for you, and I love the way you all are, interacting together. So, Chris, as the authors sort of speak to each other, if we can have everybody on screen, that's wonderful. This is a question about genre, and I'm going to kick it off with Kate because I think of her work in a very specific genre myself. But when I've talked about her work with other people, say at Thriller Fest, they completely disagree. And so some people are like romantic suspense, some people are like psychological suspense. I just want to hear from you, Kate, about how you feel about genre as it applies to your work. Or don't you feel about it? Maybe it's just not something you consider at all. And then I would love to hear Steve, and Isabella, and Rick speak about that same question.
Yeah, I the only reason I think about it is because of what I might have to call it. If for PR reasons, I just came back from a big tour, and you find you have to call it something. But for me, the one constant is that I do like it, whether it's a part of the series or a psychological kind of thriller. I do want it always to be a whodunit. I guess that's just, I love them, and I love there to be a puzzle, and the reader is going to try to find out the answer to the puzzle. So that's the only thing I think about, and you can call it whatever you want.
That's interesting, yeah. So Bailey are the mystery series, but on a whole other landscape, and it doesn't matter how you term it, except that they like to put it on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah. And different people put it different places. So
they do. That's interesting. Okay, could all of our authors, Steve, what would you like to say? And then Isabella, and then Rick.
I mean, you have to give it some name. You can't just call it a book. You just can't call it's a thriller. Mine's an international suspense thriller that it used to be called spy novel, but the spy novel died, and when it died in the 90s and Da Vinci Code came in 2003, it brought the genre back, but it became action, history, secrets, conspiracies, and that became the international suspense thriller. So that's the label we give to my genre. There's quite a few folks writing in that genre, and quite a few books that fit into that genre. So that's how I say it when someone asks, what do you write? I get often said that I write historical novels. I do not write historical novels, though there's a lot of history in my novels, and there's a lot of flashbacks to things in history. But my books are modern day thrillers about something from the past that still matters today, still has relevance today. So that's why mine are international suspense thrillers.
Well, I actually think what you just said, what we said matters today, something that has a connection to the past but matters today. I mean, it's too, long to put on the Barnes and Noble, shelf, but it's a really good description of what
yeah, I call it the so what. A novel has to have a so what. I mean, who cares if you find the amber room? Who cares if you do all, what does it matter? I need an ooh factor, something from the past that you kind of go like, ooh, when you hear it, like Templars or Napoleon or Charlemagne. And then I need a so what. I need the two together to make the novel.
Fascinating. Ooh plus the so what. Okay, Isabella. Thoughts about genre? Does it apply? Is it a constriction?
Well, I like to think of it as kind of a plus. In other words, I'm always categorized as a police procedural thriller, just because my main character tends to be in law enforcement. But it's very high octane, and it's more of the thriller because usually you know who the bad guy is right up front in mine, and it's just like, totally edge of your seat to figure out how they're going to get to the bottom of it or what have you, but not always. But I like to add plus because I feel like that is a little restricting. I've written 3 series now, and so like in the first series, it was like there was like a crime family involved. And in my case, it was a cartel crime family. It was like, you know, that's kind of what it was. But in reality, I set the crime family up almost like something Mario Puzo would have done, you know, where it was a whole elaborate family. And I really put a lot of research and depth into what's going on. Because in reality, I can tell you that most cartels are not that interesting. They're just not much about, there's not a lot of depth. So I had to kind of make all that up, and, you know, and so I created a whole crime family, but they were the antagonists. It was not an anti-hero situation or anything, because, you know, they were definitely the antagonistic force, and that kept going through, you know, the whole series. And so I feel like it was more than just an ordinary police procedure, because you really got to know this, you know, all of these different characters and her family and the other family and all that. And then in the next series I wrote, it was, you know, it might have been categorized as a serial killer thriller, because, you know, they were dealing with, it was the FBI and dealing with serial killers and, you know, and all that. But I feel like, again, there was so much more to it than that, that I really wanted to do a lot of character development for my characters. And then this one that I'm writing now, it's kind of funny, because when I first pitched the idea of this book, and I was talking about, you know, kind of an FBI agent who gets like stuck in a real life escape room kind of situation. And my editor at my publishing house, she's like, well, that sounds like you're talking about Criminal Minds meets Squid Game. And I said, of course. I mean, people who know me will totally get this. I'm like, what is Squid Game? She's like, Isabella, get away from the computer for 2 seconds. But I never watch TV. I really just read and write all the time. I literally thought of the idea without having any idea that such a thing existed. So I quickly had to like download and like watch, you know, just to make sure I didn't accidentally write the same plot, and I didn't. But yeah, a lot of readers have said it reminds them of that. It's really funny because, I mean, it had, you know, or they'll compare it to other things I don't know anything about. But I like to kind of mash up, because I do feel like a police procedural thriller is restricting. So I like to drag in other very rich elements into it. And, you know, it's funny, you know, Kate talking about, you know, the psychological or the domestic, and that's something I'm looking at doing in the future, but it would have kind of like be police adjacent, but maybe more of that angle to it. And, you know, I've already told my editor, and she's like going bananas. So, you know, it's
I
fun.
love that.
I want to
I think
mash
that
it
could totally work as a mashup. Yeah. So Rich, I know you are going to have to hop. I will give you your choice of answering either the last question that I have for all of our stellar lineup before we sign off, or you can answer the genre question.
Well, I'll answer the genre question, but
Okay.
first of all, you know, Steve, Isabella, Kate, Jenny, this has been a real pleasure for me. I've learned some stuff. It's been fun to listen to you. We don't, authors don't get to compare notes enough. So, you know, this has really been uplifting for me. Okay, genre, I hate it. I mean, I understand you have to market people, but I will tell you, when people call me a legal thriller writer, I know what I'm trying to do is more and different. It's reductive. And for every person you attract, you exclude somebody who says, I don't read that kind of thing, even though if they read you. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have become friends of mine, particularly women, read my books and said, yeah, geez, that was really great. I thought you were kind of dumb. And, you know, what else to say to that? You know, worst comes to worst, that, you know, they can make all of us kind of sound like hacks. If, you know, with a kind of cheap, productive kind of labeling. And that's always bothered me. I mean, Steve's completely right. You know, you have to find a way to market it. I understand the impetus, and you know, I've been very fortunate, so I shouldn't be as resentful of this stuff as I am. But when you work hard on a book, and you try to make it a book that not only appeals to people on a human level, and but also a book that says something, it's very hard to watch it reduced to kind of a Cliff Notes version of what you think you really did. So unfortunately, I have to be somewhere else. I'm in New York, but you know, Jenny, thank you for inviting me, guys. It's been a real pleasure, and you know, I'm filled with admiration for what you guys do. We're an embattled group, writers, and but we have each other. But thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I hope everybody will
Thank
be
you, Rick.
introduced to Trial. It was great having you on, Rick. We're going to go around with one more question for the other three panelists. And Rick, thank you. Everybody read Trial. It will be of the moment.
Thanks, everyone. Take care now.
Bye. So Steve, Kate, Isabella, this is the question that a lot of our Rogue Reads listeners love to know, which is about kind of the challenging aspect of writing. And it can sound very glamorous, and it can sound very creative, and it can sound like you get to do that for a living, but it's also a really, it's hard work and it's a job. And so I would love to go down the line, starting with Steve, and ask, what was a challenge with The Ninth Man? And I know you were writing with Grant, so you could talk about any aspect of that, but some challenge with The Ninth Man, some challenge then with Between Two Strangers, some challenge with A Killer's Game, and really, kind of bring our Rogue Reads listeners into the room where where the magic happens.
Right. You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Well, I do this with every novel. Every single novel I've ever written, I try to do one thing I've never done before. Something new, something different, something I've never done technique-wise in some fashion. And I've always done that. I've done 22 novels now that have been published. And so each book, there's something different, something like I tried once, I had a non-point of view character who was a major character in the book. And we were never in that person's head. That was a challenge. How do I make that work? How do I make it happen? The Bishop's Palm was a first-person novel, my first-person novel. One book I used 2 points of view. One book I used 6 points of view. Trying less, trying more. I always try to do one thing different. This book was about writing with someone else. Because I had never written an entire novel with someone else before. I had done novellas and I had done short stories. And I will say that I don't play well with others very well. I kind of have my own way of doing things. And not to say that I won't learn and change and say, wow, that's pretty cool, let's go there. But I do have my own little way of doing things. And we're writing this book to my audience, so it's got to appeal to my audience, and I have to make sure that it does. But luckily with Grant, it was a joy because he is just first class in that regard. I mean, when he wrote with Clancy, he wrote just like Clancy. I mean, it was him. When he wrote with Jim Rollins, it was just like Jim. When he wrote with Cussler, it was just like Cussler. So with me, he adapted. He couldn't adapt fully. I didn't expect him to. That would be unrealistic. So that's why I had to rewrite the novel and put my voice into it. But now I've noticed in the second manuscript, it's getting better, much better. He's got the voice better. By the third manuscript, he'll have me down. He'll have it down. So that was the challenge for me to write with someone an entire novel. But you've got to find the right person. You got to get your ego out of it. And you got to focus on getting the job done. And I think writers out there should all do that. You should try to do something new, something unique, something you've never done before with each manuscript you do to challenge yourself.
It's interesting. I was going to touch on, we don't have time because I can't believe how fast this goes, but I was going to touch on the fact that Steve Berry is a great friend to new writers, to debut authors. And I think I was going to ask, what would be your kind of word of advice? And maybe that's it. Do something new, do something that challenges you. Kate, can you tell us a little bit of a challenge when you're writing Between Two Strangers, or just something that came up new in this book for you?
Yeah, and I'll do it quickly because I have to jump off. I've got a visitor who wants to be taken out to dinner in New York City tonight. I think, in the psychological suspense category, which I get marketed in, the readers talk about, I want twists that I don't see coming. I heard one reader say online, if I'm not saying what the F every few chapters, I'm in the wrong book. And it reminds me of like movies where like Jaws 7, where the shark is coming out of the water to take the helicopter down. And I feel like it's just, I'm reading books that are so absurd. I read a thriller lately, a psychological thriller where she didn't have just one serial killer in her life. She had two. What are the odds? Isabella, you know, I read that piece she wrote. It's great. You know, what are the odds? So I guess for me, it's just trying to keep it realistic and I find it helps to just keep going back to the character and go, what would she see evolving from here? But thanks so much for having
Thank you, Kate.
Steve.
You're going to hear things.
It was so
Thanks,
great to
everybody
be
read
with
between
you.
two strangers, and it was so great having you on. It's always such a pleasure. And
Thanks,
yes,
Jenny.
we're going to wrap up, I promise. Isabella, real quick, challenge with Killer's Game. We'd love to hear what it is.
Well, I'll make it quick then. We're all having to go, I guess. So, but I guess I would just say that that a challenge for me sometimes is, to keep some of the expectations and also make it fresh. And I'll give you a really good example is that, obviously when readers read a thriller, there's always a scene where, you have the final showdown between the good guy, the bad guy, whatever the antagonistic force is. It's like, it's an obligatory scene. You have to do it. You can't have whoever your lead character is. They can't just get a phone call. Oh, guess what? We picked up the killer. You want to come in and interview him? No, that's not acceptable. Okay, so you have to have that scene. And it is a huge, massive challenge because think about all the screenplays, all of the plays, all of the books, short stories, novella, everything through history, going back to ancient Greece. I mean, it's like this trope has been explored incredibly over, it's just so much. So my challenge with every book, and I also do try to challenge myself, is to try to bring some kind of freshness to the tropes where you are meeting the expectations, you're not disappointing those, but you're bringing something completely different into it that makes it feel fresh. That's my challenge.
Isabella, honestly, that could be a panel in of itself. And Steve, if we had more time, I would love to hear that exact thing, because talk about sophomore novel itis, as you used to call it, like how when you've written it through, you keep it fresh. Anyway, I cannot thank you both enough. It's all Steve and Isabella. I've never gotten to interview.
Yeah.
Thank you for
You're freezing up.
and Isabella's latest locked room. Hi. Hear me?
Jenny, you're freezing up.
Yeah, can you?
I want to,
Okay, I'm gonna.
I think what she was trying to say is that everyone should definitely go out and read these books, that these are masters. You guys are masters of this genre, of these genres that you don't necessarily like to have labels, but I get that. I do get that myself. But I know our readers are going to go out and read. I know that I would think they would like to know if you're going to be touring or doing anything. That would be one other thing I would ask. Do you have any places that you're going to be where people can come and see you and meet you?
I'm doing Grant and I are doing a virtual event at the Poison Pen on next Monday night.
Okay.
So you catch that online. And then
Okay.
we're doing an event here in Orlando, and we're doing an event in Vero Beach, Florida. Those are the three we're doing, but they can
And they
catch
can
those.
find that on your website?
Absolutely. And there's a link to the Poison Pen. You can watch us, on your computer.
Okay. How about you, Isabella?
Well, actually, most of my stuff is done because my book came out at the first of the month. So, I started doing this stuff, ahead of time. And actually, I was in New York City on launch day at Thriller Fest, and then just finished my last, I had a party at the Pen also, but I got to be there in person. I was lucky. Poison Pen, we love the Pen. But also same as Steve, you can go to my website and you can actually get recordings of all the different things. I've done a lot of radio shows and other appearances and things like that. you can find all that, links to all that on my website, and also the articles that I wrote. If you want to know about the brain science, there's a link to that in Criminal Element, and some of the other essays that I've written. If you like the brainy stuff, go for it.
Perfect. And one last thing, everyone, there will be a drawing of those that registered and attended, and 4 of you are going to be lucky recipients of one of these books. So be prepared. We'll reach out to you if you're the winner. And I do not have the roster for next time's Rogue Reads, but you can go online to www.roguewomenwriters.com and find out our next meeting will be in September. We are taking a hiatus for July and August. So everyone enjoy your summer.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you.
Everybody, take care. Bye.
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 Bye.